today. Director, producer, editor, Chihiro Wimbush. Chihiro is an Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker. He was co-director and cinematographer on the documentary feature Dogtown Redemption about homeless shopping cart recyclers in West Oakland, California. He also edited the award-winning film Changing Season about a year on the Masumoto family peach farm in the Central Valley. He has directed, produced, and edited numerous short films, most recently Liminal, about prisoners released during the pandemic, reconnecting with nature. Ricochet is his third collaboration with Jeff Adachi after serving as editor on Jeff's previous two films, The Ride and Defender. And we also have Matt Gonzalez. Matt is chief attorney at the San Francisco Public Defender's Office, a position he has held for more than a decade. He represented Jose Inez Garcia Zarate as co-counsel in state court. So thank you both for coming here tonight. We are so honored to have not only the film, but both of you here to be with us. So I'm going to start out, Chihiro, I want to have you tell us a little bit about Jeff Adachi, who tragically passed away last year before this film was wrapped up. And this film was the third in a series of the San Francisco Public Defender's Office. So tell us a little bit about Jeff and the vision that he had for this series of films.
Yeah, so Jeff was, he was the public defender in San Francisco for, was it 16 years, Matt? Yes. 16 years. When he passed away, he had just been reelected for another term. And it's rare because he's the only elected public defender in California. So he's directly accountable to the people. He's not appointed, and one of the few in all of the United States. And my relationship with him actually started in fall of 2016 when we started work together on the two films that you mentioned, The Ride and Defender. And he had this dream of making an ongoing series that would probably still be going if he were still alive, about the criminal justice system, but as seen specifically through the perspective of the public defender's office. So a unique vantage point that we don't always see well represented in media. And then, with this film being the third film, it was pretty clear early on, the media coverage obviously surrounding this case was swirling almost from the beginning, and then certainly when Trump made it an issue, a plank in his campaign platform, I think Jeff had an instinct that this was a story that not only was like the biggest case to come out of his office in his term, but also something of national import that might have something to say about our criminal justice system, our immigration systems, our political system, our media. There's so many issues that it touches. Gun control, it's like you can almost choose what hot button issue in America right now you want to choose, and a lot of them are in this film. So we started working on this pretty much when the trial got underway in fall of 2017, and obviously trapped filming the trial with Matt and Francisco. And then when he passed away in 2019, we had a very, very rough cut that Matt and Francisco were not particularly fond of. And it was pretty rough. And we needed some time, obviously, to grieve and to collect ourselves. I mean, we being me, his family, his friends, the public defenders, and the community. So there was a good 6 months of nothing, and then another 6 months to kind of slowly pick up the pieces and put them together, and then another couple of years until January of this year. Actually, I was still editing the film right before a festival. So it's been a 5-year journey to get here. Sometimes I didn't think we were going to make it, so I'm really glad to be here tonight to get to share it with you and to have Matt, because part of it is to really highlight the work of public defenders like Jeff, obviously, but what Matt and Francisco continue to do, and all the public defenders in their office. we often think of public defenders as the people who take the deal and they get kind of, that's the image of them. And I think there's another image that we wanted to show of the San Francisco office that is empowered, that is fighting for people who don't have representation, and that includes people in immigration court now as well.
I'm just curious, how many people in the audience had heard about this case and heard about it in the media? Yeah. Yeah, and you probably didn't hear it exactly like this story told it, which, yeah. So, you know, one thing I really appreciate, Chihiro, is how you put this together in that you really bring out the humanity of so many players in this, you know, because this is the thing that we don't hear in the news. We don't hear who Mr. Garcia Zarate was, his family, what they have to say about him. We see Matt and Francisco talking. We see their lives, you know, how passionate they are in the work that they do, and you know, it's wonderful storytelling to be able to bring out the humanity in a story, which you know makes us able to connect with it. Yeah.
I would say I really appreciate you saying that, because that was actually one of the hardest things as an editor. And I should say, I don't know if I said at the top that I actually was just the editor on the piece until Jeff passed, and I only took on directing and producing because I was the person who knew the film best when he left us, and I didn't aspire to be sitting, it should be Jeff sitting here probably, and not me, but I'm sure he's with us tonight. But as an editor, I really appreciate you noticing it, because the tone of this film was so hard to do, because I obviously wanted to humanize Garcia Zarate, because the media had just portrayed this very two-dimensional image of him. But I also wanted to show the work of the team. And even the hardest one was actually the Steinle family, because it'd be pretty easy just to blast them. But it's a little more complex than that. I mean, just starting with the fact that I don't know what it's like to lose a daughter, for example, or a sister. So there's like a human level to it where these are people that are grieving, they're angry, and they make some bad decisions, like no question. And I think we don't shy away from showing Cade's Law and everything like that, but also showing that there was some evolution to the perspective as well, as far as once they saw what Trump was doing with it. So I wanted to not lose their humanity, while at the same time not trying to whitewash what it was they sort of set in motion as well. But it's a tricky thing. I've been sort of criticized from both sides, like too easy on them, or the opposite. And you know, I just tried my best to make it so it was as balanced as it could be. But I think there's no question where we stand on these issues.
I think that means you did a good job if you get criticized by both sides.
I make everyone happy.
Yeah. Yeah, so Matt, tell us what it is like to step into this case and all of a sudden it's this big media thing.
You know, the thing that I've learned in my career handling cases, the one thing you can always be certain of is that whatever you think at the beginning of a case is not going to be what you're thinking about as you learn more about it. And it just always happens. What you think are the facts are not the facts. Every single case I've handled. In this situation, Jeff had called me. I was in Denver visiting a friend, and he called me and he asked me if I'd seen the news about this case that we were going to have to assign. And I told him I hadn't seen anything about it. And he started telling me that it was this immigrant that had been deported a bunch of times. He apparently shot a woman at point-blank range and had confessed to it to a TV crew and to the police. And so I had just been involved in assigning a heavy case that week, so I knew some of our top lawyers that were available for it and started telling them who of the three I thought were available might be good for it, and then he asked if I would do it, if I had the bandwidth to do it. And I remember saying, oh, you want me to do it? I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And, you know, one thing I've learned as the chief attorney is you have to be willing to take the hardest cases, and, you know, if you, well, I was going to say, if you have a really good defense, we're going to assign it to somebody maybe whose first big case ought to be something they have a lot to work with. As this one unfolded, you know, when I watched the film, the thing that really hits me is both the media, but also the courts, the legal process, both the prosecutors and the judges. It feels like nobody just stopped to say, hey, this isn't what we thought it was. Like, there just wasn't a moment for that to happen. And there are cases that I have seen over the years where a police inspector will say, wait a second, this isn't what we thought. Or a prosecutor will go to the boss and say, hey, boss, this isn't what we thought. Or the judges will say, I'm not going to let this proceed as a murder case. This is not what we thought. Everybody kind of failed. You know, the safety net all failed at every moment. And, you know, we got to a certain point in the case where even the media was running with stories, and good journalists, you know, would reach out and try and talk to experts. And I remember one story in the Chronicle by a reporter I like and is really a good person and very thoughtful reporter. But he basically, you know, wrote a story about how the Sig Sauer gun is very hard to fire. And it does not, the trigger is not easy to pull. And so that's when I realized, boy, we've got to start creating our own media. And at the same time, Lopez Sanchez, we were asking for a true name finding, that his true name was Garcia Zarate. And so just as the court accepted that, we started publishing our own opinion editorials, and I wrote an opinion editorial about how easy this gun is to fire. I wrote a piece about how Cates' law wouldn't have affected Garcia Zarate because he was doing 6 and 7 years when he got arrested. He was not going to get 5. You know, we wrote a story about how his prior convictions were none for any kind of violence or serious. So we just started doing our own media, and that helped as we got closer to trial, because new reporters that were being assigned to cover the case, you know, they'd call us up and want to start from scratch, and we'd say, hey, go read these 6 things we've written. And we noticed that suddenly the wrong facts were not getting repeated as much. But in California, the rules of ethics for attorneys are that you cannot try your case in the media, in the press. So there are very strict rules about being able to publish things before a trial. But the rules are somewhat untested. They allow for you to defend your client if you did not initiate the media that is injuring your client somehow. So in effect, you're responding, and that's the path that we took. But I expected that we would have to face a state bar complaint of some kind, but it never came, so we didn't have to go through that.
Also, tell us a little bit about, we talked about this when the verdict came down, and you didn't really know if you were going to land it or not.
Yeah, we didn't. I just said earlier that we didn't have any prepared remarks. We hadn't even discussed what was going to happen or what that would look like. After the prosecutor had given her closing, there was a sense in the courtroom that we were in trouble and that we were not going to win the case. As you know, watching the film, it seems absurd. What, a skip shot? This is ridiculous. But you know, you've got the CSI expert saying it's a straight line, and her theory ultimately was he was an inexperienced shooter. He was trying to shoot her, and the gun went off just as he lifted it to fire. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but you know, the audience in that courtroom was enthralled with this argument. So, you know, we stepped out, and I remember as I walked over to where, you know, the press wanted us, somebody asked me whether or not I had a response or a comment to Jeff Sessions, or how Jeff Sessions was going to respond. And that's what put that in my head as we walked over to say something. I was also just very aware that there had been a lot of heckling during a lot of the media moments in the courthouse, where people would interrupt us while we were speaking, and there had been a lot of warnings to us about you know, just safety issues. I had journalists who were, you know, good investigative journalists who've won major awards, reaching out to us to literally say, hey, I'm doing this undercover thing in these white supremacist blogs, and literally not supposed to do this, but you guys need to be really careful. There are people that want to kill you. And so whenever we were in the courthouse, you know, there are a lot of people standing around, and when you've got all these hecklers, literally, that's why as we're getting together to start our remarks, you can see my eyes kind of looking around like, you know, who's standing around here? Because it was really that kind of energy, unfortunately. And then, you know, I know Francisco's remarks were not prepared either. I mean, we had lived this case so long that it was just how we felt. And I'll just say, you know, we both he and I started our remarks talking about the Steinle family because, you know, you want to offer some degree of generosity and kindness to them for what they've been through. But you're also aware that if you walk up to them during a trial, you're putting them in a very uncomfortable position. They don't want to talk to you, and you're putting them in a position where they may feel they have to be kind to you, and they don't want to be. But during the trial, you know, the family had seen the opening statement, so they know what our theory of the case was by that point. The father came up to us. We were sitting on a bench in the hallway and just kind of, you know, leaving him and others alone, but he came up to introduce himself and really showed a lot of kindness to us. And I could see his wife and son off in the distance. They were perplexed by what he was doing, but I think it was his way of just trying to let us know that he understood what we were doing. And, you know, obviously we're extremely professional in the courtroom, and there's no secrets. I mean, what we thought the case was about. You know.
And then I think what everyone is wanting to know is how is Garcia Zarate? What is the situation now?
So I went to visit a very talented criminal defense attorney in San Francisco after we got this verdict, named Tony Serra. And Tony, he's in his early 80s now, but he's one of the greats. And I asked Tony if he would take Garcia Zarate's case. And Tony took the case on and started working on it. And he was ready to go to trial on it. And I spoke to him a week before the trial was supposed to start. He was very upset that the judge had found Garcia Zarate incompetent to stand trial, because that vacated the trial and meant that they could continue to hold him in custody until they could restore his competence. And Tony just felt like this was a travesty because he could win the case. The federal prosecutors at some point had decided they wanted Garcia Zarate to plead guilty to gun possession and let's just get it over with. And about 10 days ago, less than 2 weeks ago, that is in fact what happened. Garcia Zarate has entered a plea to gun possession under the federal law, and the judge is going to sentence him soon. We expect to credit for time served and let him be deported, I think is what's going to happen. The one thing I'll just clarify, and maybe this is getting too much in the weeds, but the jury convicted him of gun possession, and they actually were quite thoughtful in how they did this because they were misinstructed. But they understood that when he picked up this object that included a gun, that he did not know what it was. So he was not in possession of a gun. He didn't knowingly possess it. But the moment it fired, he now knew it was a gun. And it was in his moment, or in his hands for a moment. And so they asked the judge a question. They said, how long do you have to hold a gun to be in possession of it? And California has a defense called something like momentary or transitory possession. And we had already asked the judge to give this instruction. He wouldn't give it. When we got the question, we asked him to give it. He wouldn't give it. And what I explained to the judge was, I said, look, if I give you an envelope and you take it and you open it and then you see there's narcotics or contraband in it of some kind and then put it down, did you possess the contraband? No, you didn't knowingly. When you obtained possession of it, you didn't know it, and the moment you knew what it was, you put it down. That would be absurd to convict somebody of that, but that's what happened. So on appeal, that's why a court of appeal overturned that conviction unanimously, and that was 3 judges who were all former prosecutors, all agreed that the jury was misinstructed. So we don't think that he would have been convicted of gun possession in federal court, but I think everybody wants this case over with, and they're just like, poor man, he's been in jail so long. And I think from the defense point of view there is some concern that his restoration of competency may not last for an entire trial, so then it'll just get delayed again. It's not as if he'll have a trial and beat it a few weeks later. He could end up in jail for another couple of years if he's not competent. So.
Well, how about questions out in the audience?
Does that work? I wasn't impressed with the translation services that he received. And I was just curious, is it illegal to badger a suspect in a language that's not their original language?
Yeah, that's a great question. The officer that interpreted, his Spanish is pretty good, but it's not so precise that they're really talking to one another the way they need to with that kind of precision. There is no requirement that you have a court-certified interpreter in these interrogations. I will say in defense of Covarrubias, who I like, and his Spanish is really quite good, they take a break. I don't know if you noticed, the interrogation started right before 2 o'clock. They're still at it at 5 in the morning. But they took a break in there, and the Covarrubias goes back in the room alone with Garcia Zarate and talks to him. And he's very kind to him. And he says, look, we're just trying to figure out what happened because it doesn't really seem to make sense. And Covarrubias at some point says to him, was this an accident? Did you mean for this to happen? And I think for Garcia Zarate's point of view, the part that is in the film where he's saying, I don't remember. Then he talks about sleeping, but he's saying, I don't remember. He's saying that because I don't think he saw that Kate Steinle shot. I think the moment the thing shot, he threw it and he starts walking off the pier. So they're interrogating him about and basically accusing him of killing someone. And he is just so confused. He really doesn't know. And I think, I was saying to Susan, I think he came to terms with it by the time the TV folks are interviewing him 3 or 4 days later, because he's seen it on TV so many times. He's seen his own picture and seen the accounts of what happened. I think he started coming to terms with, oh my God, that this must have happened.
felt from this end. And one of the things that I also noticed was the fact that when they were asking him about his background in Mexico, and he was lost, like completely lost, and all the different questions that they were asking him, because there's a lot of trauma, right? And on top of the fact that he's being accused of killing someone that he doesn't really have a recollection that he even did that. And so for me, I think I don't know, he kind of had the, not the, how I want to put it, I don't know, he wasn't treated as an equal. And the whole entire system kind of was against him to begin with because of his background. The fact that he was unhoused was one of the biggest issues, especially in the Bay Area, right? And especially in that area where it took place.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing that it seems really quite obvious now, but it didn't occur to me till the eve of trial. We had the interrogation interview in several columns. So you would read what the officer said in English. Then it would be what the interpreter was saying in Spanish. That would be translated into English. Then you had Garcia Zarate translated into English. So, and then what the officer says back to the police officer about what was just said. So you have all these columns. And it was so confusing to read these lengthy. And finally, I just said, wait a second. I just want the conversation between Garcia Zarate and Covarrubias. What does he say to him, and what does he say to him? And then I want that translated, and that's it. Forget what the cops say. And that's when we first started to see that the conversation wasn't saying a lot of the things the officer was saying, and it wasn't saying a lot of what Covarrubias was saying in English about what he had said in Spanish. And, you know, that's when the first time we started to really notice things. I think, you know, Garcia Zarate, there's Chihiro keeps this in the film, the discussion, I think Jeff and I are talking about how he's going to be perceived by the jury. And what happened was, when they brought him in for an interrogation, he wanted an attorney. He didn't want to talk to the police, so he invoked his right to remain silent. They openly violated it, and so Francisco had sought to get the statement, you know, excluded from trial. I told him the judge isn't going to grant that, so don't worry, I'll be ready for it. But so the judge ruled that the prosecutor could use any part of the statement that they wanted. We came back and we said, well, we want then the subsequent interview with ABC7 to be introduced, because you can use hearsay to help explain this other statement. The judge ruled against us, even though there's a clear evidence code section that allows it. Fine. Then the ruling for the prosecutor was she could use any part of the statement she wanted, so she was cutting out all these places where, I mean, what you saw here was really lucid. I mean, where he's just like talking about something, they have no idea what he's talking about. And so by cutting all that out, she was trying to make him the most rational actor that he could be to fit into her theory. Yeah.
Chihiro, I was wondering also, what else are we not seeing in this film that you were privy to?
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
There's a...
Matt despairing being the judge.
Yeah, actually, so we were talking about some of these cutting room floor scenes, because there's actually lots of scenes I totally cut that were edited as probably like a, 3-hour Ricochet redux somewhere. But there's scenes of Matt lying on the floor because you see late in the film his shoulder's messed up and Francisco has to put his jacket on. And I didn't know this till like way after the fact that was why Matt was lying on the floor. So it's a strange scene where Matt's like stretched out on the floor complaining about the judge, and everyone else is kind of on the team is sitting around him, kind of looking down on him. But that's a scene. There's actually there's a scene similar to Francisco's where Francisco's at home, and we're trying to humanize Matt and Francisco, so like these are the people you're going on the journey of the trial. So we didn't want them just to be kind of the people that you see, in the office. So getting Matt's backstory, obviously his political career is really relevant, and Francisco's family history is really relevant, with which kind of also shows to the history of immigration in our country and how we like to demonize different people at different times in our history. And so there was a failed scene where Matt's actually really into art, and so we had this idea like, let's show Matt doing his art at home, and so he does collaging, and there was this whole scene of Matt doing his collages with the bits of paper, and Francisco and Mike Hinckley, the other attorney, in their suits, kind of watching him do this, and it was strange because they were in their suits, and Jeff was really trying to push this narrative of like, okay, Matt, like talk about like collaging, like it's like how you put a trial together. And Matt was wisely not really agreeing to do that too, obviously, and so there was this like tug, and it was kind of like a little painful it was a little bit too on the nose of like, this is how we put together a trial. It's like putting together a collage, and it was just a little too on the nose. So I think that, hopefully people can get to see Matt's art at least sometime, because it is a pretty cool other dimension to Matt.
So I don't have a real good memory of these scenes, but they were really trying to come over to my place to look around, and and I really wasn't into it, but I finally relented because Jeff's like the boss, right? So that was part of the problem. We were not into it. So I was like, well, he can come over and we'll talk at the house and just have a conversation, and he can see what's lying around. But I started making art from found paper, I don't know, like over 15 years ago, 17 years ago. And it just started like a little meditative practice, the way some people do yoga or gardening or take a walk or read a book, whatever it is you do that relaxes you. It wasn't intended to be like, oh, I'm making an art piece, but it evolved into that. But anyway, I do remember that it was we probably sabotaged the scene so you couldn't use it.
Matt definitely sabotaged that scene. And I'll say just quickly, there was one other scene that actually used to open the film that's not there anymore. And it was a hard one for me to let go as an editor. You get kind of attached to certain scenes. And it was an opening day. And now there's like 3 shots from this scene that once lasted like 5 or 6 minutes. And it's the 3 shots where Matt's just sitting at his desk the first time you see Matt, and he's looking at his computer monitor, and there's a shot of Garcia Zarate on the pier. So 6 minutes down to like 3 shots. This is the pain of editing. And initially I loved it because it was all the characters coming in and out. It was like the chaos of the opening day, and Jeff comes in and they're worried because the judge isn't going to allow them to use photos, and you just see all the members of the team coming in and out, and the camera's whipping around. So from a film technical perspective, it was just great. I introduce all the characters, it's this energy, the camera goes zipping down the back stairs with Matt like clambering down the stairs on the back way to the courthouse. So it was just a lot of fun, and it just didn't. Well, because in the end, the judge allowed the photos, and so there was no dramatic payoff at all, because it was like this whole scene built around the judge not allowing photos. And then you get there, and it's like, oh, the judge allowed the photos. And it's like, well, why is this scene still in the film? It was like 6 minutes of, oh, the judge allowed the photos. So it's kind of like I guess it could be like an editing master class where it's like you take 6 minutes, and I loved this scene, I loved the shots, and the cinematographer wanted to kill me for taking it out, and it was one of the I just couldn't let it go, and I couldn't let it go, and then I just was hearing from people, the beginning's kind of dragging, or why is that scene in there? And it's just those things where you learn you have to let go. And I will say the one scene that I cut early that almost never changed, and I always knew it was going to work, and I knew that it was going to have the reaction it always does, was their speeches after the verdict. I actually cut that almost before anything else. I was like, I just have to get to this. And I know I'm getting here, and so it's like I cut that first. and it was like it was almost unchanged, maybe slightly trimmed down. But it was just like what they were saying, you know, when Matt calls out Trump, it's like everybody always loves that. I love that moment. And, you know, what they're both saying, Francisco almost chokes up, you know, when he's saying his thing, and you can just feel how much they feel it. And it's this payoff. And so I was like, well, I just have to figure out how to get to here. And so sometimes you get lucky, and it's just like it works right off the bat.
We should just, you know, there's the other lawyer with us, the third lawyer, Michael Hinckley. His son actually goes to university here. And couldn't join us tonight. So Mike is the tall, bald, Caucasian man that looks like an FBI agent or something. So here's his story. He started as a public defender in the 90s, early mid-90s, I guess mid-90s. So I knew him back in those days. He later was in private practice with another former public defender, and somehow they started representing a lot of law enforcement people, either in disciplinary hearings or when they were charged with crimes. And slowly he was a go-to attorney for the Police Officers Association. And so his entire practice is representing police officers. So before the trial started, he reached out to me because he knew we were about to start this big trial. And I should also say he's a very kind man. He's a Buddhist, just very calm. He'll do anything for anybody. So he just reached out. You know, I've known him 25 years. He's like, hey, if you need any help on that case, let me know. So I said, well, you know, we've got hundreds of questionnaires, jury questionnaires. It was like a Friday. We were going to spend the weekend reading them. I said, if you've got time, come read some questionnaires with us and help us mark up things we need to talk with jurors about. And he showed up and never left. I mean, he just worked the whole trial with us. He wasn't getting paid or anything. Mike got along with Garcia Zarate really well because Michael was always cared about how Garcia Zarate was feeling, how Jose, his nickname is Pepe, how he was feeling. So he would bring him chocolate and he would bring him coffee. And that was what Garcia Zarate looked forward to. Mike was always his favorite. And the bailiffs were cool and let us do what we were doing. Michael, because he's in private practice, continued to make appearances on the federal case, but he kind of dropped out because Tony Serra had it. By the end of the case, the state case, he's in the back and remaining very quiet, but it's because the Police Officers Association was very upset that he was working with us. And after the trial and the verdict, they stopped referring any cases to him. Like, they just totally tried to cut him off. And it took months before some of the folks that, you know, officers in the labor group and that had been around a long time, some retired who said, hey, this isn't cool. Mike's a good guy. He didn't do anything wrong. You know, they had to, like, literally go to bat to get the others to. And so he's back to doing that work. When Garcia Zarate pled guilty recently, Mike was the attorney that was with him, mostly because Garcia Zarate likes him a lot, and Mike spent much of a weekend talking to him, but also because the federal prosecutors wanted him to plead guilty to gun possession, and that it was gun possession in a case involving manslaughter, or where the act of manslaughter had occurred. And Michael went over there to say he's not agreeing to that enhancement. He's not going to admit that. And there was a lot, apparently the federal prosecutors were very upset that Mike intervened to stop that from happening. So anyway, you don't really get to know Mike in the film, but he's a wonderful guy. So. Yeah.
I also like the clips you have of Dave Eggers, is that his name? Yeah, they're really good. And how did you get him?
Was that through you, Matt, or?
I've known Dave for a long time, but I was unaware that he was going to be a court watcher. And I remember just seeing him like, oh, I think that's Dave Eggers. What's he doing here? And I guess Bobby Coleman must have introduced Jeff to him, and then Jeff arranged to interview him because after the trial, Dave did publish an article about Garcia Zarate case, and also what was that Senate candidate that got defeated in the South? Yeah, say Roy Moore. Do you remember that? It was happening about the same time, and I think I always find it amusing when he talks about, you know, my closing argument and how difficult it was going, because as a lawyer you can feel when it's not working, and I could see the jury was really having trouble, and I was lucky that the day got broken up and I got to sit down and think through things. But you know, Dave was very, yeah. I don't think it was as shaky as he thinks, but but it wasn't on point yet. Yeah. I mean, that argument, I mean, I probably argued for 4 or 5 hours. So it's not a 20-minute thing. I mean, you get up, there's so much to cover. And then the break happened, I was probably 3 hours in, and then came back the next day for another hour and a half or something. And you're not repeating yourself, you're working off of notes, and it's a very deliberate thing. You've got a slide presentation where you PowerPoint, you know, you're trying to show them jury instructions. I mean, I probably spend a half hour just telling the jury how to deliberate, giving them pointers and ideas of what to do when they go into the jury box. And so it's kind of painstaking if you really are talking to people that have never done it before, and you're going to give them advice on how to do it. That takes a little bit of time, you know. Most lawyers will say 1 or 2 sentences about that. But I think it is a reason why I've won a lot of cases, because I put myself in a position of a juror who's listening to these people talk to them, but they're thinking, well, what am I going to have to do? You know, and I explain, well, you're going to have a verdict form, and if you're voting guilty, you write guilty and you sign it, and if you're not, you get them comfortable with everything they're going to have to do, and also how to pick a foreperson. Usually, you know, jury, if you've ever been on jury, you just go in the room and everyone's like, well, I don't want to do it. Who wants to do it? And someone says, I'll do it. And that's the foreperson. And I said, don't do it that way. I said, go back there and make everybody explain what experience they have leading a group, what kind of, you know, are they good with people that disagree with them, and spend a little time because it's going to matter. And you just help them, so then they go back there and they do it differently because you've given them a pointer of how to do it. And those things really help.
Was this more so because of how publicized wrongly this case was? Did you have to do more of that just to counteract all the information that was floating around out there?
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily on how to deliberate, although I did, at the beginning of the case, make it very clear. I said, listen, what happened is really awful in this case. Like, what you're going to hear is just an awful tragedy. I said, but you're not going to get a verdict form that asks you whether or not you like what happened. You're not going to get a verdict form if you know, whatever, to sanction this. What you're going to get is a verdict form asking you if a particular crime has occurred. And you're going to have to find the elements of the crime. And if you can't find them, then you can't, you know, you have to vote not guilty, you know. And you get people really at the outset thinking, like, okay, that's right. I don't, you know, he's agreeing. None of us like what happened. If we could undo it, we would all undo it. You know, unfortunately, you can't by that point.
Is there other questions out there? Pam?
I have 2. Were there scenes with the prosecutor that hit the cutting room floor? Did you ever get to speak to them? And then the other one, how long did the trial take? Like, how long was it?
So we never got a chance to sit down with Garcia, the assistant DA. I know Jeff reached out to, I think, to Gascon, to the DA, to see if they would want to participate. And I guess understandably, you know, if the public defender reaches out and says they're making a film, maybe they don't trust a perspective. And I think similarly he reached out to the Steinle family through some channels as well, and also was rebuffed. And so we didn't have that kind of access, and we didn't. The other tricky thing was we didn't. Obviously, the judge didn't allow any courtroom cameras or audio, so it was difficult to construct a case that way, and that's where Dave Eggers became so important, because I needed the voice of somebody who was in there, who was, at least somewhat impartial. I mean, he has his point of view, but he could really report on it well. I mean, obviously being a novelist, he could really frame kind of the macro picture as well as some of the detail along with the juror. And I needed some voices of just people who could describe for us, like, well, what was happening and what were the perspectives, and where was the DA's argument strong. And so that was sort of like the best I had to work with. It was really difficult to do, and we had the courtroom sketches, but as an editor, it was really tough, because obviously we're really in the public defender's point of view through the case, but you have to have the other side represented as best you can, and obviously we didn't have that access, but newsreel could at least report kind of like what was happening, and then Dave and the juror could really give us, like, how are they reacting to these arguments in real time, and I think they really saved me, actually, having those interviews. I think without those perspectives, it would have been really, really tough to do. And as for length of trial, was it about 5 weeks? Is that right? Like,
Not including the pretrial hearing.
not including pretrial. Yeah. So I mean, initially it started out as early as like summer of 2015, right? And then was there just a 2-year break, or did you go back and forth?
So I don't remember when the preliminary hearing took place, but then there was litigation around a Fourth Amendment issue that went all the way to the California Supreme Court. They asked the other side to brief it, and then they decided not to take the case at that time and wait until they saw if he was convicted or not. And then, then there was a lot of pretrial motions. So once the trial started, it took many weeks before the jury was impaneled. I mean, maybe a couple of months. The Fourth Amendment issue is really a fascinating issue. You have a right not to be detained or arrested without probable cause, right? You can't be arrested without probable cause. It's a cornerstone of American jurisprudence. There are cases in California that if you arrest somebody on a hunch without probable cause and they confess a murder or whatever it is they confess, that's not going to hold up. But I mean, that's just your hunch may have been right, but that's just the way it is in our law. So in Garcia Zarate's case, if you think about it, when the police stopped him and they put him in the patrol car, he's handcuffed, the whole thing. They keep him in the car for an hour. They take him to the station. They keep him at the station for about 3 or 4 hours, and then they start the interrogation with him. At that point, they don't have any probable cause to believe he's the actual shooter. What they have is that he's on the pier and he left. He was seen walking off rapidly, but nobody saw a gun in his hand. Nobody even knew where the gun had come or the bullet had come from. So yeah, it's really a fascinating issue. And so when we filed the motion in front of the preliminary hearing judge, a really, really great judge, he asked the prosecutor if she was going to write a reply to it, and she initially said no, because the prosecutors always win these motions. Why bother responding to it? So he looked kind of surprised. He was like, "Have you read the motion?" And she was like, she suddenly was like, well, let me take a closer look. And he's like, yeah, I think you should take a closer look. And so they then did file a reply. The motion was denied. We took it to the Court of Appeal. It was denied there. It was in front of the California Supreme Court. They then, I think, basically, the way I read it was, they were admitting, yeah, there's probably a problem here, but we're not going to fix it right now. If you lose the case, come back and talk to us. Yeah. And I get that it's complicated, but, it just, in this job, you just learn, how to call balls and strikes sometimes, and you know there are these bigger rules that you just hope take care of us. You know.
We probably have time for one more question, and then we'll get to.
So I'm just going to stand up because my heart is kind of bursting after seeing this, and I probably speak for a lot of people here, but I feel like this could have been a boring film. And instead, from the title on in, it's absolutely riveting. And the order, because you were talking about what you had to cut and what you didn't, but the way that, for example, the pier becomes almost like a character recurring and then goes into, there's the videographer in the scenes who's then showing that video from the pier 1,000 feet away or however far away. The other thing that's brilliant is where then the Ricochet isn't there at the beginning, how it comes out, when the gun comes up, and then in between there are the scenes in the public defender's office where you're talking. So, and then that incredible scene of the relatives of, you called him Pepe, talking about this horrible childhood trauma that he had, and who knows if that's why he kept coming back. But so I wanted to give a big shout out for the brilliance of the order of the film, and to you, and can I call you Matt Gonzalez or Matt? Because the film is really of an incredible performance. You give a brilliant performance in that film, even though it's your life. So that's what I wanted to say, is I think we all need to give you both a standing ovation, and we're honored to have you here.
Let me just say, when I see the film, I just see these scenes where I'm really tired. It's like, God, I look asleep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I see the film, I think about how tired I am from editing for 3 years. So, but thank you. We really appreciate that.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you so
you.
much. Can I just quickly add one thing? We have we just added to our website, which is ricochetfilm.com, which if you want to learn a bit more about the film, but more importantly, we just added a page this week called Take Action. And so if you want to engage with these issues, there's some wonderful organizations that are dealing with the intersection of immigration and justice. And so we list a few of them there. We also have a discussion guide we just completed this week that is not yet on the website, but will be soon, with a lot of sort of discussion questions for classrooms or just for people who want to dive deeper into the issues. But if you go to ricochetfilm.com, Take Action, there's these wonderful organizations. You know, my job is really to shine the spotlight on the issue, but then hopefully if you feel inspired, how do we then take this energy and change things? And there's some amazing organizations that Francisco's connected with that are on that website under Take Action, ricochetfilm.com.
Well, and I was going to say also, we're going to try to put that information in our newsletter that's going out tonight.
Yeah,
It better go out tonight. Or it's going out tomorrow morning, but it's going to get made tonight.
And Matt kindly reminded me, we just want to say thank you so much for hosting us. For me, my first film that I ever went to a festival with was here, I think 14 years ago, and short film. And so I remember just how special coming here was, how just friendly the people were, how much they made me feel like they valued film and filmmakers, and it's wonderful to see that hasn't changed at all. It just keeps elevating, and just so grateful to be back. I used to live in Portland, and I did radio in my prior life at Cable Community Radio, if any of you know that. And so it feels like coming home to my other home, coming back here. So thank you.